Hey, welcome everyone. This is a new edition of the Veteran Crowd Network Live. Today we're going to be talking Afghanistan with my friend Jason Dempsey. He is a fellow at the Center for American Security, a think tank in Washington, D.C. Let me bring Jason on. Hey, Jason, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, great to be here, man.
Hey, you have been making the circuits, and I really appreciate you being a guest. You've been on multiple shows, TV programs. You've been in Politico, the New York Times, multiple articles talking about this. Why not just give you a second and just, you've called this Vietnam 2.0. Let's start there, getting out of Afghanistan.
Yeah, I mean, we're at a real inflection point, and knowing that your audience is primarily veteran business leaders, even those who served in Afghanistan, and even those who didn't, particularly in the veteran community, all of us have an obligation to undertake a moment of introspection here and think about not just our own culpability, but what do we do going forward? Because what you said is exactly right. We just replicated the war of our fathers for many of us. We just executed the failure of Vietnam, maybe even more spectacularly. And so for us, we now have to think, well, we didn't learn anything from Vietnam, and we replicated that failure almost to a T. So how do we navigate the post-war period in some way that's different, so that we're not setting up our sons and grandsons and daughters, for Vietnam 3.0?
Jason, you're a West Point grad. You did 2 tours, combat tours in Afghanistan, as well as 1 in Iraq. Is that correct?
Yeah, about 2 years in Afghanistan.
Can we talk just at a high level about your observations in Afghanistan? I mean, I think one of the things you've said is that, we tried to put the American model, in a culture, in a society where that really wasn't a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, well, for one, the American military is great at being the American military. Being a military is not the same as building a military. And so it's the idea that we sent over Army officers and Marine Corps officers and Air Force officers, naval officers, and said, hey, go build something that looks like the American military in a completely foreign land. None of us ever thought, well, what is it that makes the American military so successful? What makes it what it is? And there's a whole host of things that we don't pay much attention to, but we take for granted. Effective bureaucracies, right? Commitment to the rule of law, a lack of corruption, absence of, religious and tribal division. Not so much anymore, but for the most part, absence of those kind of divisions. In addition to a literate population base, right, that you can recruit folks from for a high-tech military. We have all those things. All those things are essential to making the American military run. We walked into Afghanistan and said, well, we need to recreate the American military because it works for us, without thinking about, well, who's building the rest of it, right? What's this army going to succeed? What base is it going to succeed on? And so really what we did was we went through the motions. We deluded ourselves about what we were building. We ignored the larger questions and some of the fundamental problems with what we were doing. And most distressingly, myself included, every single one of us rotated through Afghanistan and said, well, I did a decent job. Somebody else will need to fix the bigger problems or own up to the overall failure.
Did we lose sight of the mission? I mean, I go back to the beginning. It was capture Osama bin Laden, right? Yep. Take away a terrorist stronghold. Okay. Then what happened?
Yeah. So we absolutely lost track of the mission. So, and it's something that we all share blame for. I know a lot of folks want to just say, oh, the politicians gave us a mission we couldn't do. But there's there's some mutual guilt here about how all of this evolved. And two things really evolved. And both of them relate to the idea that as Americans, we think we can just completely reshape the world and do anything we want. And there's a difference that we are often too immature to recognize, that just being the most powerful doesn't mean you're all powerful, right? Just because we're the best doesn't mean we can completely set the terms for everybody else on earth. So the two errors that you alluded to that we made, one, we roll in, the Taliban gets swept away fairly quickly. We read that as our own prowess versus kind of how politics operate in Afghanistan. And then we said, wow, we've got a blank slate, not paying attention to culture or what was there or who'd tried things before. So of course, as Americans, we're like, well, heck, we can turn this country that's completely different of ours into a modern democracy. Why not? We're the best. The other error we made, and that's even more so on the military, was the idea of the Taliban being our enemy and our threat. We went in to get the Taliban to not host transnational terrorist groups. Taliban was not a transnational terrorist group. But because they'd hosted Al-Qaeda, they quickly morphed into the enemy. And many of us, again, myself included, everything I say here, I'm as guilty of as anybody, began to look at the Taliban as kind of a mortal enemy of the United States. I get it. We don't like them. They're horrible they're horrible people. We don't like them. But that doesn't mean, right, it's incumbent upon us to completely destroy them. And as we learn, we actually couldn't. So that morphing of we're going to build Afghanistan into something completely different from what it is. And two, instead of negotiating with the Taliban, we're going to go and, we're going to keep fighting them until we can get decisive victory over them. That was hubris, that was arrogance, that was ignorance. And that was people not looking at the big picture, but getting invested in this idea that America can do anything it wants.
Hey, Jason, today it's kind of 2020 hindsight, right? But were there people 10 years ago saying these things and we just didn't listen? Absolutely.
I mean, I did what I could in active duty, but I've been writing and talking about the fundamental errors in our plan since I left active duty 6 years ago. There were analysts looking at this circa 2012 saying we're building something that's fundamentally flawed and will not survive. And it didn't take much in terms of looking at the military we were building to say we were completely deluding ourselves about what we had built and the idea that it was going to ever be self-sustaining, right? Think about this. We took a nation of fighters and we made them entirely dependent on the most advanced helicopters on Earth. Right? And they ended up losing to a force that over 20 years never used a single helicopter in battle. But somehow we had guys like Joe Dunford, David Petraeus, all these leaders saying, we've really built this great thing. The Afghan Air Force is doing great. The commandos are doing great. This is how we're going to win the war. And both of those, the Air Force and the commandos, were things built in our image that absolutely, even as early as 2017, 2018, when they're in battles down around Ghazni without a lot of American support, it was obvious they were a house of cards and that they were going to collapse the second we stopped pouring billions of dollars and tons of money into contractors, keeping all that stuff running. It really was, it was a puppet show. What we were showing was an Afghan military that looked like it was competent, but what was behind the curtain was all of our intel capacity, and an overwhelming blanket of air support that kept the Taliban at bay all the time. And again, that was us running it. It was never Afghan sustainable.
Jason, I've got a real concern that's just gnawing at me. After Vietnam, there was a period of time where the military was not trusted. It was a low point. We had I entered the Army in 1982. We were still, working on the hangover, if you will, from Vietnam. I'm scared that the pendulum in our society is going to swing in the opposite direction, that the military is going to lose the respect that it worked so hard to earn. And candidly, I think peaked, in the last 5 years. Do you see some of this happening?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing I've studied for a long time, both, just being in the military and academically, is this reputation of the United States military. And for all your listeners, particularly all the vets out there, everybody needs to understand we are at peak military, if not, as you alluded to, probably slightly past peak military, where we had all the respect and confidence of the American public. In fact, I'd say too much respect and confidence from the American public. And we have to grapple with, okay, how do we deal with that? Do we become embittered and retreat and say, oh, well, the civilians never understood us? Do we replicate all those excuses that we came up with after Vietnam, where we said, oh, if only they'd let us kill more people, as if killing was at all the thing that we, were short of doing in Afghanistan, and even Vietnam. We have to really be careful about how we take ownership of our reputation, and we do it in a way that's productive and is not us versus them. And there's a real issue here. Veterans, particularly veterans who've left the service, right? We like riding on those accolades and that reputation. We're leaders, we're straight talkers, and what we don't realize. So a lot of, again, riding on that reputation, a lot of guys might say, well, I'm not going to criticize the military because everybody loves me because I'm a vet. Well, guess who that leaves to make constructive criticism of the military? When the military is the most respected institution around, when people don't have much connection with it, you're it. The veteran is the one who has to engage the public and say, hey, listen, this is what the military can do. This is what it can't do. This is where you're entering into some fantasy land if you think we can do X, Y, and Z. Actually, we're more suited to A, B, and C. And oh, by the way, yeah, our military leaders aren't water walkers. They are leaders of a large bureaucratic organization, and they're susceptible to the same failure, the same kind of groupthink, the same kind of avoidance of accountability that any public bureaucracy is capable of.
I'm going to touch the political third rail here a little bit and say that, our military was more focused on rooting out internal threats from, perceived supremacist groups, racism, and so forth. In the meantime, we've got all of this other stuff going on. We also have a situation where we've had, officers who have spoken out, have been relieved of command. I mean, isn't it incumbent upon us as veterans to sort of be the voice for this? Is a gag order in place for the people that are on active duty? I'm just concerned about that.
I'd be interested in examples, frankly. And obviously this is a different topic than in Afghanistan. I think, for one, I would say unequivocally, there's no way we can say that the debates over the last year or so have influenced the way we've fought. That's completely on us, right? There is absolutely no political culpability about, hey, we need to be looking at these elements of service. None of that has affected the way we fought Afghanistan at all. And there's a larger discussion there about how the military navigates current politics. And the only thing I'd say on that is what you're seeing is efforts to politicize the military. And I use that term very broadly. The military is the last institution standing. Even though I said we're at peak military, the military is starting to collapse just like every other American institution in terms of public respect and confidence. But because it's been the only institution that's had the widespread confidence of American people for the last 10, 15, almost 20 years, right?
Right. Really, ever since 9/11.
business, everybody else is down in the gutter. Nobody looks at any other institution and says, that's, I can believe in that one. The military has been the only one, but a lot of that's been a fantasy because people just don't understand how the military works. They think, okay, well, I don't believe in anything else. I don't understand what those guys are doing, but I've seen some cool movies. They seem uber competent. I must love them. Now what we're seeing is partisans on both sides are starting to come in and say, how can I grab some of that military reputation for my own internal domestic gain? I never thought I would see, some of the stuff I've seen on TV from both left and right wing media excoriating military leadership. But it's something we're going to have to get used to. And it's something that, again, is incumbent upon the vets who are listening here. No matter which side you come in or fall out on, always think to yourself, hey, if somebody from the other side was trying to use the military like this, what would I think about it? Mm-hmm. And then check yourself from saying, okay, I'm going to claim that, hey, the military thinks like I do, or the military, particularly when it comes to the domestic stuff. It's on us to prevent other people from grabbing members of the military and saying, these people believe in my agenda. These people, represent my values and beliefs. Because the second we stop doing that, I used to call this the paradox of prestige, right? One of the reasons everybody loves the military is because it's seen as a servant of the country.
Right.
It's seen as the thing that's going to protect us from foreign enemies. People from all walks of life join and they go and they look out for America's interest. Once the American military becomes a domestic political football, it's game over for the reputation of the military. And so, again, it's incumbent upon all of us, left, right, middle, because all walks are represented in the military. It's incumbent upon all of us to say, hey, everybody chill out, leave the military out of these debates. It's absolutely right and necessary to criticize and think about, okay, well, how is the military doing its overseas job? That we should all be involved in. But we need to check ourselves for anybody who tries to grab the flag or the uniform and say, these guys represent my side in these debates.
Two closing questions for you. One, in the international geopolitical scene, we've sent some messages to our allies and our adversaries as a result of our results in Afghanistan. What do you think are the the takeaways with the Chinese and the Russians in particular?
I would beware of easy answers and signaling and reputation, because everybody says, "Oh, we pulled out of Afghanistan." Everybody thinks that, right, we're quitters. I would tell you, I stood in Logar province while the Chinese were working for 2 decades mining under our protection, right? Developing the Aniak copper mine, one of the largest deposits on earth. And they did that all under the cloak of American occupation. So it's not a very easy answer to say when we pull out of there, to say it's a loss. Frankly, given that we were building something that was unsustainable, that we were on a failed path that cost us nearly $2 trillion, I think a lot of folks were laughing at us for the last 10 years, to continue to pour money into Afghanistan that ended up in mansions in Dubai. I mean, for us to stop that, how is that a hit on America's reputation? And the academic literature kind of says the same. It's like, defending or staying in a cesspool where you're just pouring billions of dollars and countless lives into a failed project. Pulling out of that isn't necessarily a reputational hit, but now it comes, well, what do we do with that money that we're not spending? What's the opportunity cost? Where do we shore up relationships? How do we counter China? In my view, China and Russia, heck, they can own Afghanistan. Good luck. And to see how they do with Pakistan in the midst there. Let them pour their blood and energy into that.
And finally, what's next? I mean, if you're projecting out the next 6 months or a year, Is there something that you think is a big concern? What do you think is coming down the road at us?
Well, for again, just to keep it focused on this, it's it's how the veteran community grapples with this loss, right? We just lost a war. And so how do we have the meaningful conversations that say, hey, did we really set this up right? Did we send the right people? Did we have the right objectives? And if not, why not? Because one of the things I talked about before is the really dangerous thing about the way we fought in Afghanistan and the way the military bureaucracy set up the fight was that every single one of us walked through. Every single one of us got a really glowing OER or evaluation report at the end of our tour. We all got into tour awards that said, you did awesome things for Afghanistan. Everybody got an A for an effort that ultimately failed. And it's really hard then, like if we're all walking around saying, hey man, it was great when I left, it's really hard then to stop and say, well, wait a minute. What was my responsibility to, if I was doing everything I was asked, but it was still failing, what was my responsibility to say, hey, wait a minute, maybe the overall picture is wrong? Because that's our obligation to the American people. And that's the obligation to the soldiers below us, is to say, hey, wait, everybody who ever passed through Kunar, Logar, Wardak, they were all told they did awesome. And yet all those provinces felt like just every other province. And so we are the ones that have to get into the introspection that says, this is, and educate the public on, this is where your military failed, this is why it failed, and this is how we collectively make it better.
Hey, Jason, thank you so much for doing this. I have to get used to calling you doctor now. You've earned your PhD, but congratulations on that. Our guest has been Jason Dempsey. He is a U.S. Military Academy grad and fellow at the Center for American Security. Again, Jason, thank you so much for joining us today. There's so much to unpack. Thanks for sharing all your thoughts with us, and good luck to you. I really appreciate you doing it.
Thanks for hosting the conversation, Bob.
I'll give you one more shout out, a Bravo Zulu for that performance to you. Thanks so much, folks. And that's a wrap. This has been the Veteran Crowd Network Live. Thank you.